Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're in for a treat, and Kathleen's going to tell you all about what we're in for tonight. But just to kick us off, welcome. My name is Gina Piccolini DeSalvo, and I am one of the coordinators with Kathleen, who's going to introduce herself in a moment, from the Parent Resource Center in Arlington Public Schools. We're a part of the special education department, but we support all families that are going through the special education process or just are having some troubles that need some resources. So the Parent Resource Center is it's your Parent Resource Center, and we sponsor and co-sponsor wonderful events like tonight with Anne and her team. And we also have some wonderful resources that we love to share with you. We have a very robust lending library. We're always happy to find resources for you if you tell us what your needs are. And we're also happy to do one-on-one consultations. Kathleen, if you don't mind just sticking our contact information in the chat. We have an email address and a phone number. And if you have any questions or follow-up questions that you want to drop us a line later, we'd be happy to get back to you. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to my partner, Kathleen, who's going to talk about what we're in for tonight.
So, and as Gina said, we offer lots of learning sessions throughout the school year. And when we are lucky enough to have Anne Dolin visit us, it's always one of our favorite evenings because she is, I think, of all of our presenters, one of our presenters who I think offers the most practical tips for families. As a mom and a former public school teacher, Anne Dolin knows how stressful it can be to support a child through their academic journey. For nearly 30 years, she's worked to help families and educators reduce that stress. First as a Fairfax County teacher, then as an author and the founder of Educational Connections. Her team now consists of more than 100 subject tutors, test prep tutors, and executive function coaches. Together, they help students overcome challenges and reach academic goals through virtual one-on-one sessions. So we will let Anne share her wisdom and insight with you. And Anne, thank you so much for coming back to Arlington and joining us tonight.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Kathleen. I always love being here with the parents of Arlington County Public Schools. So tonight we're talking about no more late nights and overcoming procrastination with kids. You know, every day parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And we often hear that chronic theme that their kids are putting off what they could do now, that they seem unfocused, a little bit disorganized, and really not meeting the potential that parents thought they had. And ultimately, when parents share these things with us, I think what they're really saying is, I'm worried about my child's future. They will often say they're worried, you know, if their child is having a hard time with these things now in middle school, what's it going to be like in high school? And I've got to think they're also worried, will they have the skills they need going forward in college? So that's what we're here to talk about tonight, some strategies to help kids succeed throughout the grades. Let's start off with the procrastination statistics because, you know, it's not a simple thing. Procrastination is actually fairly common. In fact, in a self-reported study, 80% of high schoolers said they procrastinate. And it's even worse as kids get older. 80 to 95% of college students say they regularly procrastinate, and 50% of students consider themselves chronic procrastinators. So if this is such a common theme, what happens when kids do and adults have these issues? Well, the fallout is that the longer students wait to turn in an assignment, the worse their grades. So when they push, when their back is against the wall and they've got to do something and it's super last minute, the later they do something, typically the worse their grade is. And that makes sense because you're not able to do your best work. You're not able to check for errors and make sure everything is just so. All you care about is finishing it and getting it done and turning it in. And when kids engage in this type of behavior, and adults too, it's linked to stress, depression, anxiety, and fatigue. So how do we help our kids? Well, it really depends on the type of procrastinator that our students are. There are actually two kinds. There are functional procrastinators and dysfunctional ones. Now, functional procrastinators are students that know they have a deadline. They wait until the last minute. And usually they're staying up late at night. Again, their back is against the wall, the adrenaline's pumping, and they know they have to get it done. And somehow they eke it out. They finish it, they turn it in, and nobody knows except for them, their parents, who are also stressed out. But the teacher has no idea, and none of the classmates realize it either. However, the other type of procrastinator is the dysfunctional procrastinator. And this student also waits till the last minute, but typically waits until the very last minute. And then they run out of time. They don't have enough time and enough focus to get it done. So they're feeling terrible about it. Everybody in the family is stressed, and the teacher knows it because they haven't turned the assignment in on time. Those kids aren't functional anymore. They're dysfunctional because their behavior is now impacting not just them and their family, but also significantly their grades. The problem with functional and dysfunctional procrastinators is that kids that are functional have engaged in this behavior for such a long period of time, they don't really have a pain point around it. So they often, because they don't get bad feedback from their teachers and they still get it done and they're getting decent grades, they don't always see a reason to change. However, kids that are dysfunctional procrastinators, they often have a willingness to change. They just have a hard time doing so. And what I found, especially with functional procrastinators, is the pandemic made it a lot worse. During the pandemic, kids had these broad swaths of time when they didn't have a schedule. And what do when you have too much time on your hands? Well, you would think that, oh, I can spend more time on this assignment, but no, it just gives kids more time to procrastinate and push something off. So we know that the pandemic has made it worse. But why is this happening in the first place? Is it that our kids are just lazy? Is it that they're unmotivated? Is it that they just don't want to do the work? Or is it something else? And I would argue that if your child has had these problems over a long period of time, it's just not pandemic related, but you've seen this behavior for many years, and it doesn't seem to be getting better, I would argue there is something more at play. And it could be what your child is having difficulty with is executive functions. Now, executive functions are these cognitive abilities in the frontal lobe of your brain, right behind your forehead. And they're really responsible for two main things: helping you to plan out what you have to do, and then focusing long enough to see the task through to fruition. Now, actually, that's kind of a simple version. Executive functions are pretty complicated. There's actually 8 types of executive functions, or 8 pieces of this puzzle. And I'll just quickly touch on each one. But for tonight's sake, we're going to focus on the one about initiation or getting started. All right, so first off, there's inhibition, which is a person's ability to bat away distractions and focus on what they need to do to get something done. Initiation, as I mentioned just a second ago, that's basically a fancy word for getting started. Now, anybody can get started on something that they want to do. Anybody can pick up their phone and scroll through TikTok videos and look at TikTok videos for 3 hours. Anybody can pick up their controller and play Xbox. However, initiation in this concept is your ability to start something that you don't want to do. That's really the true test of initiation. And the true test of attention is not just paying attention to something you like, but it's paying attention to something that you find difficult or laborious. The next one is planning and organization. For example, if you have something due and there are multiple steps, can you put a plan in your head and be organized enough to execute it? Emotional control, can you do these things without having a meltdown? That's an executive function too. Working memory, your ability to juggle things in your head while you're doing them. Theoretically, this can relate to a lot of things. In writing, it has to do with, oh, I need to write down exactly what I want to say so that it sounds cohesive. I want to make sure I use the correct grammar and punctuation. I want to make sure if I'm handwriting that my letters are formed correctly and my words are spelled right. You have to juggle a lot of things in your head. Another is shifting, putting down one thing, starting another, especially if you don't want to do it. Materials organization. It used to be these were things like binders, backpacks, book bags, but these days it's more about digital organization. And then the hardest executive function skill for kids is actually self-monitoring. Another word for self-awareness. For example, if you see that you're going down a rabbit hole of distraction and you've been in this text messaging group for 45 minutes and you really should be studying for history, can you say to yourself, I need to put this down and get started. I've wasted a bunch of time. I really need to finish this. That's the act of self-monitoring. So when we think about all these things, we know that executive functions are crucial to school success. And really above anything else, they're the most important when it comes to kids not only being successful now, but down the line. And it's easy to think if you have difficulty with these things that this is how you will be for the rest of your life. But actually, that's not true. Even though these things may be difficult for you, whether you're 16 or 60, your behavior can be improved. So tonight I want to spend time talking about how we can improve. But before we do so, I want to start by discussing some of the reasons behind this behavior we see of putting things to the last minute. It's easy to think that when kids do this type of thing, that they just don't want to do the work, that they know how to do it, but they simply don't want to do it. They don't want to engage in the work. But the reality is that the majority of kids that are a part of this behavior are overwhelmed and underprepared. It feels big and hard and a little ambiguous, and they're not quite sure how to do the task. They're overwhelmed and they feel like they just can't get it done correctly. And in the last group, and this is, in my opinion, the largest growing group, at least that we see in our practice, are anxious kids. And these kids are often perfectionists. They want to start, but they're resistant to doing so because they're worried that the end result, their work product, won't be awesome. It won't be an A and it won't be perfect. So their brain says, you know what, that's kind of scary. I'm worried about that. So let's do this other thing and avoid it altogether. That feels a lot better. So there's always reasons behind why kids do things, and it's not always what it seems like on the surface. So tonight, I want to give you 8 tips to help your child at home, and maybe help you along the way too if you struggle with these things, because we all do. All right, so tip 1, know when you're about to procrastinate. So when you're about to put something off, if you know you're about to partake in that behavior, that is step 1. And that is the most important thing, is just recognizing, oh, you know what? I have this feeling that I really don't want to do this, and I really want to Snapchat with my friends. That is a feeling of overwhelm that you're often going to procrastinate. And knowing that is the first step. In fact, there's a fabulous book that I can recommend on this topic called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle by Timothy Peichel. And he says that this issue actually isn't a time management problem. It's actually an emotion management problem. And that makes sense, because if we can manage our emotions that are telling us don't do this, then we have a running start. So once we realize, okay, I'm about to put this off, I need a better strategy, what do we do? So tip 2 is time travel. And this is when we want to think about the future instead of the here and now. So we want to use a strategy called self-talk. And that basically means we're just talking to ourselves. It can be silently or out loud. And we want to use if-then scenarios when we talk to ourselves. So, for example, if I finish this math, then I can go out to dinner with my friends and not hanging over my shoulders. If I write the thesis sentence to my essay, then I can call my friend and talk about this weekend. If I do that, then I'm going to go and grab a snack. So anytime you can kind of reward yourself, that's really powerful. And the brain actually responds really well. We know that once we know that we're about to procrastinate, studies show that if we can trick our brain into thinking it's easy, or we have a reward, that is best practice. So again, we want to make our brain think that getting started is actually not so bad after all. We can do that partially through time travel, but we can also use tools to help us. And one is a good old-fashioned timer. We have kids use a timer 3 ways. One is called 5 minutes of fury. You get a timer. I like physical timers better than timers on your phone. It's easy to start checking your text messages or going on Snapchat or Instagram. You set a timer for a super short period of time, like 5 minutes. I call this 5 minutes of fury. And you say to yourself, again, the self-talk, I'm going to work as hard as I can, as best I can, focus as much as I can, just for 5 minutes. And when the timer goes off, I'll either take a super quick break or I'll keep on going. You can use the tolerable 10. Anybody can tolerate anything for 10 minutes. Or take your child's age and add 1. And all of those are super easy ways to chunk time into small increments just to trick your brain into getting started. Now, if you have a child who does not like, before I go on to the kids that don't like timers, let me also mention the Pomodoro technique. And this is actually one of my favorite ones. I like this especially for older kids. Now, these are kids that they might be able to get started in super short increments, but their issue is staying focused for a longer period of time. And in fact, the Pomodoro technique was developed in the 80s by an Italian researcher who looked to see, what is that sweet spot for people to stay focused and motivated? Is it like 10 minutes? Is it an hour and a half? What is it? And he found that it was 25 minutes. And he coined it the Pomodoro technique because he did the research on a tomato timer. And he's an Italian. So in Italian, tomato means Pomodoro. And so we often use this strategy for kids. When we work with kids as executive function coaches, they'll do anything we want of them when we're in the session together. But the trick is, how do you help yourself to do these things when somebody's not sitting next to you? And you have to have these tricks up your sleeve. So we'll teach them, setting the timer for a short increment of time, but they really love this one, especially our older students. And here's how it works. So you set the timer for 25 minutes, say the same mantra, I'm going to work as hard as I can, best as I can, focus as much as I can for 25 minutes. And then after the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break, you set it again for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break. Now, some kids can only do 1 Pomodoro, fine. Some can do 2. And as kids get older and they get into college, they can often do up to 4. And that's where we know the brain is spent. There's tons of research that shows anything more than that, it's just more than anybody can handle, and you need to come back to it later in the day. So here's how it ultimately looks. Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. All right, so we talked about timers. So we talked about chunking through time. Now, let's get to those kids that are anxious about timers. What do you do with them? Well, they need to chunk time by task to get started. For example, they might say to themselves, hey, I'm going to do only the easy ones. I don't want to do this, but I can commit to doing the first few easy ones. Or I really hate writing, which is super common with kids with ADHD and executive function because it takes so much working memory. but I am willing to write the first few sentences. Or, shoot, I have to gather 5 sources. That stinks. I am willing to gather 2. And that just gets them over the hump of getting started. So we talked about those kids that just don't want to get going. But what about the ones that are overwhelmed and underprepared, and then the perfectionists? So my next tip is to start on the day it's assigned. That means if students are on a block schedule and say they go to that class Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, a functional or a dysfunctional procrastinator, if they get something on Monday, it's due on Wednesday, when do they start it? They started on Tuesday night, probably at 10 o'clock at the last minute. We really work with kids to start on the day it's assigned. Even if you just open up the assignment and read the directions and maybe do the first one, or even if you just read the directions, that is getting started. And the reason this is powerful, if you just open the assignment, is chances are you can do a couple. But if you're at all stuck, that's okay, because now you have time. So if it's Monday night and you just started this, you can text a friend, you can email your teacher. I'll show you how to do that in a second. If you have a tutor or a coach, you can ask them about it. So in other words, you can reach out for help if you started early enough. But if you started on Tuesday at 10, you're out of luck. Nothing's going to get accomplished and you might not finish it on time. And if you do, it's probably not going to be great work. So if you are able to start, say on Monday night, you want to isolate the issue when you're stuck and ask for help. That means instead of going to the teacher and saying, I don't understand how to do this, it's better if you say, Mrs. Smith, I'm really having a hard time solving for X or getting the variable on one side. Could I stop by after school today? You can chat with your teacher online if she allows that, or you can send an email. Whatever your teacher, whatever the best way to correspond with your teacher, there you have it. You've isolated the issue and you've asked for help. We often have seen over the years that many kids, even when they do need help, they're afraid to ask. They definitely won't ask in class. Even if it's online, they won't ask. But what they will often do with help is send an email. They won't do it if they don't have a template, though, because they feel overwhelmed and underprepared. So here's a template that we use with kids, and you can use it for your kids too. And basically, it's fill in the blank, and it teaches kids how to write a proper email. I personally love this strategy because these days, kids do not know how to write an email. They don't understand how to start it out, how to make it friendly, how to ask for help, and how to wrap it up. So it says, Dear Mrs. Smith, good morning. And here you want to say something friendly, like, I really enjoyed your class. I'm writing to you about blah, blah, blah. And then you state what you've already done to help yourself. And this is key. You just don't want to say, I don't understand this. Then you wrap it up by saying, let me know if you're available after school today, for example. Thanks so much for your time. I'll see you in the next class. Most sincerely, Mary. Here's how it might turn out. Dear Mrs. Smith, good morning. I'm writing to you about my essay on democracy. When I log into Schoology, it shows as submitted. However, it has now been more than 2 weeks and there is no grade associated with this assignment. Please let me know if something is missing or if you need to resubmit my essay. Thanks for your time, and I will see you in class this afternoon. Mary. Isn't that lovely? This student not only wrote a great email, she stated what she needed help with, and she also asked if there's something she could do, like resubmit her essay. So these things might seem easy to us, but sometimes they're tricky for kids. So we want to make sure kids have the tools to ask for help. We also want to make sure that kids are using their time throughout the week well, and this often means using weekends. I call these Sunday sessions, and you can set this up in your house where you take, say, after dinner on Sunday night, and you ask your kids if they've got anything big coming up. Do you have any big projects, tests, anything that you want to take a look at now? And this gives kids a chance to open up their laptop or open up their agenda book and look at the week ahead to see if they do have something coming up, and how they can plan ahead for it. So you're basically asking them, what do you have and when might you do it? And even if kids aren't overly verbal, because they often won't be, you've at least helped them to fire up those executive function skills of thinking ahead. Truth be told, most kids with ADHD or executive function issues will just show up to school on Monday completely unprepared. This prevents that. This really encourages them to look at the week before they even step foot in school on Monday morning. So tip 7 is to find an accountability partner. If your child is stuck, an accountability partner could be somebody in their class that they work well with. It could be maybe you or your spouse if they work well with you, or maybe an older sibling. It could be a college student down the street. But an accountability partner is just somebody that you do something with. For students, I've found that their best accountability partners are actually fellow students. So we'll ask kids, is there somebody in your class you like that you can work with to do this together? You have this study guide. Would you be interested in making an appointment, like setting aside a time to do this with a friend? And in that way, they have an appointment and they're much more likely to show up for somebody else than themselves. And then as we wrap up, let's talk about those anxious kids, the kids that often feel overwhelmed and they're worried that the work they produce isn't going to be perfect. They're overwhelmed by the amount of work as well. So how do we help them to prioritize their work? I found that having a must do, should do, could do list is the secret to these kids. And that means that when we work with kids, we don't just have them start on anything. We have them categorize their list of assignments into must do's. So what on your list is so important that you absolutely have to get it done by tomorrow. You have to do it today. It's a must do. That's red alert. Make sure you get this done. What's a should do? And a should do is something, you know what, I should do this, but if I don't, it's okay because it's not due the next day. Those are going to be coded should do in your list of assignments. And then the last one is could do. For anxious kids, they often do things like overstudying. Hey, you've already studied an hour for your science quiz. Do you really need to study another hour? Probably not. Maybe not. That could actually come off your list altogether. And now your list only contains the must-dos, and that feels a little bit better to kids, especially our anxious students. All right, so I've shared with you lots of tips to help kids. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that plagues all students, whether they're ultra focused or they're not, and that is digital distractions. The research shows that ultimately, if an adult or a student has their phone in a separate location, that's ideal. So if their phone is the most distracting thing, putting it in another room and setting a timer for, say, 20 minutes, doing work and then getting back up and checking your phone, that's ideal. That's called a tech break. And that has been proven by research to be the most effective rather than having your phone right next to you. Even if you turn it upside down, you're still seeing it there. There are also apps to help kids with focus because in reality, the phone is one thing, but they're also doing work on their laptop and they're getting notifications. They've got YouTube open. They've got all these other things going on that are just naturally distracting. So these programs come in the form of website blockers, and they're all fairly similar. You can either blacklist the sites that you deem to be distracting, and for most kids, one of them is YouTube, and you can whitelist the sites that only you want to go to. They work one of those two ways. And then kids can set a timer for a specific amount of time. The reason I have Focus Booster up here is the time increments align with the Pomodoro technique. So that's always for 25 minutes. So you set the timer, and no matter what, if you try to disable the app or restart your computer, you can't get to those sites that you deem to be distracting. Similarly, there's one for your phone. It's called Forest. It allows you to set a toggle bar for a specific amount of time. In this example, it's 35 minutes. And during that time, you'll see a tree grow on the home screen of your phone. But if you get distracted and you go to Snapchat, Instagram, or say TikTok, you'll get a warning from your phone. And if you don't get out of those applications, after that warning, your tree will wither and die. Nobody wants a dead tree. You want your tree to grow for that full 35 minutes and to be planted in your forest. And the makers of the app also agreed to plant one tree for every 1,000, I believe it's 1,000 trees planted in the app. So some techniques and some digital distraction devices that can be helpful to kids. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to not beating yourself up. There's a lot of research that shows if you forgive yourself, you actually have better outcomes. And one study published in British Psychology Today showed that procrastinators who forgave themselves performed better the next time around. They actually procrastinated a lot less. So it's easy when you have this kind of behavior to get really mad at yourself, especially if it results in a bad grade, or to hear a lot of negative feedback from somebody else about your behavior. But if you can forgive yourself as the procrastinator or as the parent, you can forgive your child and just kind of look ahead instead of looking backwards. That act of forgiveness allowed kids to actually forget about their self-doubt and perform better next time. Whereas kids who beat themselves up or got lots of negative feedback, they actually didn't improve at all. So it comes down to, whether kids forgive themselves or we as parents encourage them that tomorrow's a new day, we're going to look ahead. We really do want to preserve our relationships with our kids. We want to make sure, even if our kids are struggling here or there, that really we're based in positivity. There's research that shows that kids with ADHD in school receive about 80%, the feedback they receive is about 80% negative and only about 20% positive. So imagine how that feels. And you come home and you do your homework, no wonder why you're a little bit unmotivated when it comes to academics. So for our kids, we may need to be that person who's that positive person on the other side who can lift them up. And for many parents, this may not be that you're the academic coach. It could be that you don't want that role. You don't want to be the homework police. You don't want to be the person who has to remind your child to do things. And if you found that there's lots of friction in your relationship, even though you're trying hard to be positive, it could be that getting outside help is the ticket. And again, that could be in the form of setting up regular meetings with the teacher, or it could be having a professional help your child, which is what we do. So I wanted to share our executive function framework and just to show you how somebody can help your child, but also you can use these same things if you feel you have a good enough relationship at home to help your own child. And we use the 4 Ds, and that means we want to figure out what to do. We want to make sure it's written down. we want to decide on what could sidetrack, and we want to make sure it gets done. So do, down, decide, and done. So do, we work with kids to figure out what is coming up, and we make sure they have that due date on their calendar, and then they've taken that big due date and they've broken it down into smaller increments. So they're kind of tricking their brain and making it feel like it's not that hard to get started. We always want to make sure it's written down. A lot of times kids with executive function issues say things like, I can totally remember this. They really can't. They have to have it written down. It might be in their Google Calendar. It could be an old-fashioned assignment notebook. Then we want to make sure kids know what to do when they're sidetracked, because we're not always going to be with them, as I mentioned before, and you're not always going to be with your child. So having discussions like, oh, what could get in your way of getting it done? What might you do if you feel like you're about to procrastinate? What's one strategy if you really don't feel like getting this finished? And then ultimately, we want to make sure kids get the work done. And when we work with kids, we always start with their hardest assignment, because that's what they're likely to procrastinate on. Kids don't often procrastinate on things that they find easy or fun. It's always the things that they find laborious and difficult. All right, so Kathleen, I'm going to wrap it up and do some questions in just a second. But I wanted to remind everybody that I have, after the Q&A, a survey is going to pop up on everybody's screen. And if you could be so kind as to let me know what you thought of this presentation, that would be fabulous. If I can help you in any way, you just want a sounding board about your child, I'm happy to help you. If you pull up your phone and you put the camera on this QR code, up will pop a calendar with me or with one of our program directors to help you. And I'm always accessible by email or phone. Here's my information. Please let me know if I can assist your family. All right, so Kathleen, if it's okay with you, I'm gonna go to the chat and see if we have any questions. I don't see any quite yet. So if you have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. Kathleen, is there anything that came to mind to you about helping kids get started?
I think just recognizing that work initiation is not always willful. That was really a take home for me. I mean, I think having raised a child who still struggles to initiate work, I think it's really helpful to have it be understood that, as you said, most kids really do want to get the work done, but there's something interfering. So I think doing a little detective work with them. I love that in your 4Ds. I love that decide what the distraction might be and get in the way.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite questions to ask kids is, what might get you sidetracked? Because they never think about that. Our kids are actually fairly optimistic. They often think that they don't have as much work as they actually do, or that they have more time than they actually do. Right. And so asking them, what could sidetrack you is a different way of thinking.
And it's funny, I read somewhere once that people who are often late, sometimes it's as much being overly optimistic as it is being disorganized, because and I'm frankly one of those people, like I always think I can get just about anywhere in 10 minutes and I really can't.
I know, Kathleen, I hear you, because I struggle with many of these things too. And I was listening to a podcast once, and this woman said, "Oh, I have the solution for never being late again." I'm like, okay, I got to hear this. and I actually liked her idea. She said, when people have difficulty with being on time, it is because they're optimistic. And maybe one time, like 5 years ago, they got across town in 10 minutes because they got through every light. But the reality is,
right.
that rarely happens. And she said, so if you take, say it takes you 15 minutes in your car, but what we don't think about is it takes you 5 minutes to get your stuff together and walk out to your car. And then once you park, it takes you 5 minutes to get into the building. So if you add that 5 minutes, that 10 minutes really, and I thought that was brilliant. And so I started doing that, and that really helped me too.
I think we have one question from Jeffrey asking about whether you give this presentation for students.
I do. I have a student presentation as well. So if your school would be interested in it, let me know. And I'm happy to talk to your PTA coordinator or your counselor. It's usually one of those two people that coordinates presentations.
Great.
Yep, I have this, and I have one on study skills for kids.
Mhm.
All right, great, Kathleen. If we don't have any questions, I think we can call it an evening.
All right. Well, Anne, thank you so much for your ongoing generosity and sharing your wisdom and great tips with us. I think this is something, as a parent of 2 young adults, one of whom struggled mightily with some executive functioning skills, you felt like you were doing high school all over again. So I love having these strategies for families to help their students. And I do hope that if anybody has questions, you'll reach out to Anne. Certainly you can contact Jean and I at the PRC, and looks as though we'll get some of these tools in and the handouts. Maybe Melissa said in the chat that she'll be emailing it out. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Anne, and thank you to Melissa for helping organize us. And thank you all for spending part of your Tuesday night with us.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. Have a wonderful rest of the school year. Take good care.